Hey everyone, what's up? How's it going? My name's Antonio, and today we're going to be talking about your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, Disney Plus's newest adaptation of the character. And we're going to be going over its relationship to the MCU, where it originally started out as an origin story for Tom Holland's Peter Parker, and eventually shifted into a weird MCU-adjacent what-if situation. We're also, of course, going to be examining it as just an adaptation on its own. What does it have? What merit does it hold? And what changes does it make that are better or worse than the MCU adaptation-wise? The show was announced on December 11th of 2023, which was a great time to announce the show. No Way Home had come out the previous winter, then you had Across the Spider-Verse, and finally, you had the Spider-Man 2 PS5 game. The character was booming, dominating every inch of pop culture, except for television, and that's why it was a great time to announce the show. We hadn't had a Spider-Man show on television since 2020, and that was the 2017 Marvel Spider-Man show that I hate with every bone in my body. I saw this show in its entirety. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not gonna sit here and tell you guys that I didn't watch it. I did, I checked it out. I like the character enough that I'm gonna check out most adaptations of him, and this show genuinely sucks. Its pacing was off, it had way too many spider people. This is essentially everything that's wrong with current 616 Peter Parker stories, but condensed somehow. Somehow it was worse because they kept Peter young, specifically in high school. They put him in some weird school where everyone's a genius, everyone's a spider person. And the problem wasn't just that everyone was a spider person, it was also that his entire supporting cast was spider people. There was no genuine human characters who wouldn't turn into Spider-Gwen or Dr. Octopus, who for some reason they made into a teenager. There was also a lot of crossover with characters like the Avengers and the Guardians of the Galaxy, who both had shows at that time. And you would think that this would be a cool thing, but it just sucks. The MCU synergy really gets in the way for the show, and I think it led to it just being such a disappointing adaptation of the character when it had all the possibility to be great. I think some of the fight scenes look great, but overall it just sucked. And so when these were the first images I saw of your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, I would be lying if I said I was confident in how the show would turn out. I was obsessed with the art style, yes, but considering that we saw pictures of Iron Man, Daredevil, Doctor Strange, I was worried that this was going to be a repeat of the 2017 show, where the show would just be Spider-Man and his friends, and all his friends are superheroes. However, this wasn't the case, as we'll talk about later. But another thing that really worried me was the suits. Spider-Man is known for arguably 2 suits. He genuinely only really has 2 suits that I think the general public cares about, and that's the black suit, and of course the classic suit. I don't know why I'm counting so much with my fingers, but who cares? And when we got the first look at the show, the classic suit was 1 of 8. And while the other suits were comic suits, I was like, why is the Future Foundation suit here and yet we've seen Iron Man and not the Fantastic Four? For anyone who doesn't know, the Future Foundation suit is a suit that Peter Parker wore after Johnny Storm died and he took his place in the Fantastic Four. They changed their name from the Fantastic Four to the Future Foundation out of respect for Johnny. And this is a costume that Spider-Man wore pretty briefly. And I think it's cool. I think it's a fun costume. It's in most video games if you want to play as it. But I was very confused as to why it was a part of the show at all. Same thing with these other random suits. I mean, these are all, again, comic suits, but why were they here? The 2017 show had a problem with this as well, where Spider-Man would get the big-time suit and wear that for a little bit. Or he would get the black suit, but it would look off. It seems like every Spider-Man adaptation nowadays is just trying to recontextualize Spider-Man suits when literally all we need is the classic red and blue. Every story is so obsessed with delivering us to that costume, and while it used to feel earned, it just feels lazy now. However, I think the way that this show deals with the suits is really interesting, so we're going to get to that as we get deeper into specific episodes and instances. So you know what, without further ado, let's do it. Enough first impressions. Those were unfair. We didn't even get a trailer until 2 months before the show came out. So let's talk about episode 1 of your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
Cleaning up Queens, NYC, and I do it even better with the tape.
We start the show with a weird adaptation of Peter's origin story, where he saves Nico, who's going to become his best friend in the show, from Venom? I don't know who this character is supposed to be. We see them later on in the show, and it's never really explained, but we can assume that this is some kind of symbiote monster. Doctor Strange also pulls up to fight this monster, and when Peter pushes Nico out of the way, he gets bit by a spider. Now, this scene, like I said, is not going to be important outside of the fact that Peter gets his powers until way later in the show. And even then, it's a weird storyline that they chose to go with. But anyway, we move on pretty quickly from that, which I was happy to see, and we see Peter Parker in his new homemade suit. Let me just say, this might be my favorite homemade suit in any Spider-Man media ever. I love this costume, I love this costume, I love this costume, and you know what? None of them are as good as this one. I'm gonna be real with you. I love this. This really seems like the kind of grungy, homemade vibe that I think the MCU Spider-Man was trying to go for with Civil War, but it kind of takes it to a more stylish height, and I think this also just looks more like Spider-Man than the suit that we see in Homecoming and Civil War. One of my biggest problems with the MCU Spider-Man was that when Peter Parker got his actual spider suit from Tony Stark, it made it seem like the design was exclusively designed by Stark Industries, which sucks because Peter's original costume, this, doesn't really look too much like this. And so when you try to tell me that Peter Parker makes his own costumes, and yet Tony Stark is the one who designed this costume, it just feels like Peter didn't earn that, you know? It wasn't Peter's ingenuity and creativity that produced this, it was Tony Stark, war manufacturer. Yeah, I think this suit is great, I love it, and I'm okay that we spend like a third of the show with this costume. I also want to mention the theme song. It's pretty cool, I like it. Some people are gonna call it corny, some people are gonna say that it's lame. Yeah, it's corny, dude. It's a it's a Spider-Man intro for a children's show. And before any of you guys say, hey, the Spectacular Spider-Man intro was cool, hey, the Spider-Man Unlimited intro was cool, yeah, but they're not really representative of their actual genres. They're allowed to be a little silly and have some more fun, and I think this intro does it. This specifically is my favorite part of the intro.
Need my city, you need me. And here I'm not a vigilante. Taking off the mask, I know what you see. No, you want a neighbor like me.
Just scratches my brain in a nice way, you know? One of the first things we're introduced to is Peter and Nico and their friendship in this show, which is a really fun friendship. However, I think that the problem is that it's the same problem that I have with like the Insomniac writing, where they seem so insistent on making sure that Peter is likable. They never want him to say anything even slightly offensive. And I don't mean offensive in they want him to say slurs. I mean offensive to the characters within the show. They don't want him to hurt anyone's feelings or make a joke that's too far. They never want him to overstep boundaries or make a mistake. Ultimately, I feel like this leads to dialogue that's dry and uninspired. However, despite this, him and Nico do have some pretty fun banter. They do feel like coworkers at times, but that's kind of a problem I have with every interaction in the show. My favorite scene from this episode is easily when Spider-Man helps out this woman who was trying to steal from a pizza shop.
I believe this money belongs to you.
Thank you. I just turned around for 1 second and...
Yeah, about that.
I'm sorry, I lost my job recently. When I saw the money, something came over me. I'm so sorry.
Mr. Pizza Guy, sir, I mean, it's ultimately up to you, but she was just down on her luck. I don't know. Maybe let her go just this once?
I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Okay, fine.
Hey, it's okay. It's okay. You made a mistake. Just please don't make me regret this.
I won't. I promise.
It's great. This is what Spider-Man is all about. This is the kind of thing I wanted more from Spider-Man Homecoming and just the home trilogy in general. And we got a lot of that in Homecoming, and then really not much after that. I mean, they cut that one scene with the green paint from No Way Home, which might have been like the worst decision ever. I think that scene really grounds the story. Also that diner scene from Far From Home, they cut that too. I don't know what's up with them cutting Spider-Man doing Spider-Man things, but I'm glad this show deals with that more. And we do get a few instances of this. Moving on to episode 2, we of course get the reveal that Norman Osborn, in a kind of what-if situation, is actually going to be taking the place that Tony Stark had for Peter in the MCU. Norman Osborn is fulfilling that role in this universe. And that's way more fitting than Tony Stark ever was or ever could have been. Norman being a mentor to Peter is kind of something that's been like iffy in adaptations, and even the source material, they flip-flop on if he was a father figure, if he was some creepy old guy. I mean, it works either way, you just gotta write it well. And here, it's really well written. I think the key is that they don't make Norman like a cartoon supervillain in the sense that you really already understand his motivations when you meet him. In fact, by the end of the show, you're still not truly sure what's going on with him because you feel like he's also manipulated you into believing that he's not whoever he is. We explore Peter's relationship with Norman through an internship he takes over at Oscorp, and this is where one of my biggest problems with the show starts to arise. None of the supporting characters are actually Spider-Man characters, and in fact, you can tell that they're planting seeds to make all of these characters superheroes in the future. We have a girl from Wakanda, we have a secret agent who's helping Daredevil, Amadeus Cho for some reason, that Hulk, the Awesome Hulk I think is what he's called, why is he here? random. And not just this, but Nico, Pearl, and Lonnie, who we're all going to get to in a little bit, are also going to be superheroes, superpowered people sometime in the show if we're going based on who their characters are in the comics. I will say that this isn't super prevalent yet in the show. Season 1 keeps it pretty contained on Spidey, but I'm scared that they're going to get too comfortable with introducing all these characters and turning them into superheroes, and we're going to lose sight of what was really important, which I think is telling good Spidey stories. I mean, legitimately, I'm trying to think about Spider-Man related characters who are in here. May is here, and she's great in the show, by the way. We're going to talk about her in a second. Dr. Connors is here. Norman and Harry. Oh, yeah, Harry. Harry's in this show. He's okay. He's all right. He's likable. He's fun. He has some good moments. I don't know what they're planning with him, because by the end of the show, I was kind of just left bored by some of his scenes, but what can you do? I'm glad that he's here, and I like Norman so much that I'm hoping that their relationship actually develops, because weirdly enough, we see like none of their relationship at all on screen. Also, let me just say, Dr. Connors being a woman does not bother me at all. I mean, I don't care. I care about Dr. Connors when they're a lizard, okay? If it's going to be a female lizard, that makes no difference. Just give me a cool fight scene. Keep the context of who the lizard actually is, and I'm good. I'm excited to see what they have planned for this character. This episode's kind of boring, in my opinion. We just get a lot of Peter interacting with people in the internship. However, the most notable thing is that Norman finds out who Peter is pretty much instantaneously after meeting him. Like I said with the superpower supporting cast concept, the show doesn't really delve into this yet, so I don't really know how I think of this as a decision. But the fact that Norman already knows who Peter is setting an interesting precedent for what we can expect to come of their relationship, I think. And I do think that because Norman knows who Peter is, Peter's going to know who the Green Goblin is when he inevitably shows up. And that's just something I need to see play out before I judge this concept. So I'm not going to say too much there. However, what I will say is that Harry Osborne finds out pretty much instantly, and I don't like that either. Norman knowing who Peter Parker is okay. He's kind of a narrative foil throughout the whole show, and we know that he's going to inevitably become the Green Goblin, and that's something that we can look forward to. And setting him as someone who knows who Peter Parker is, arguably one of the only ones so far, is an interesting choice that I think has a lot of drama to it. However, what doesn't have drama is when everyone in Peter's life knows he's Spider-Man, and they do this pretty much immediately. Nico and Harry, his two only friends besides Lonnie and Pearl, who are kind of in their own bubble that we're going to talk about right now, but these two already know, his two best friends already know, and that just removes so much tension from so many scenes. I mean, so much of what makes Spider-Man an interesting character is that he's constantly letting the people in his life down. I don't want Peter to be a loser all the time. I don't want Peter to never hang out with his friends all the time. But I think that if we're doing an origin story and we're doing the very early years of Spider-Man, if you don't set that as the precedent and you don't set that as the average, it's not going to feel impactful later on in the show when he is disappointing people, because we've seen him get away with it by just having people know who he is. As soon as Nico finds out, she's really supportive, which is great, but it does remove some of the tension when she has no other feelings about him being Spider-Man after 2 episodes of knowing. Let's talk about the other 2 characters that I mentioned, Lonnie and Pearl. So Lonnie Lincoln is actually Tombstone, and they aged him down to be Peter Parker's age. I think he's 2 years older, I believe. And he's maybe the best part of the show that isn't Norman. He's way more interesting than Peter. He actually has a little bit of edge to him, and his story and his development into the Tombstone is arguably the most interesting development that we see in the entire show. Even Norman, who I like so much, doesn't really have too much development. We just see him revealing more and more of himself as the show goes on. What's most interesting about Lonnie is the fact that he starts out as a really great kid, the ideal kid. He has a girl that Peter Parker likes, he's popular, he's on the football team. He literally has everything going for him, and he sacrifices it all for his brother. Peter and Lonnie both make selfless decisions. That took 7 takes to say selfless. They both make decisions for other people other than themselves. And while Lonnie does this initially to help somebody, eventually by the end of the show, you get the sense that he's only doing it for himself. He's doing it for the glory and he's doing it for the power. Peter has to learn that it's not all about the glory and that he doesn't need just respect as long as he's doing the right thing. One of the greatest parts of this show is Norman being the one to tell him with great power comes great responsibility. Except instead of the average line, he's actually saying,
With great power comes great respect.
I think that this line is really emblematic of where Lonnie is as a character and not so much Peter. Their arcs are going in separate ways, and I wish that this was dealt with more at the end of the season, because it's not. Episode 4 starts with the scene that's like perfectly representative of how like soft Peter can be in modern adaptations, where Peter used to be proud of his brains and it used to be the only thing that he really had to show off. Here he's presented as like a bumbling, loser little kid. That's not Peter Parker to me, and this does not make him more interesting or relatable. It just makes him kind of annoying. This is the episode that really deals with those costumes that we talked about earlier. And I think it does this great. It almost seems like a direct response to the MCU giving Spider-Man like 3 new costumes per movie. Norman is consistently trying to make Peter into a corporate hero. He wants to make him into some kind of symbol for Oscorp, not a symbol for hope. And I think that the show is really great at kind of delving away from what the MCU did, where Spider-Man was constantly wearing Tony Stark's suit. It's the Stark suit. That's literally what the suit is called in Homecoming. The Far From Home suit called the Parker suit, except he makes it using Tony Stark's tech. I mean, even the integrated suit is literally the Iron Spider and the suit that Peter made using Tony's tech put together. It's ridiculous. They're overdone. They're over-techy. And this episode perfectly just tackles that and says Peter doesn't need something crazy. He just needs something comfortable. He needs something friendly. And he needs something he can move around in. Speaking of moving around, I like the action in this show. I like the animation. I know that's a little bit of a hot take. A lot of people aren't going to like how this show looks, and that's fine. You know, I get it. It's not pretty all the time, and I think that the action leaves a lot to be desired, but I think they can improve on this in later seasons. The action just feels a little bit slow, and it doesn't really feel like it has weight. I don't know if that's like a sound thing, because I think that if you added some harsher sound effects, there really would be weight, especially in this fight scene with Daredevil. They feel kind of like they're just floating around in this like empty void. Norman also disregarding the fact that Peter is a spider because he got bit by a spider is just so emblematic of how he doesn't understand Peter at all. He doesn't understand what Spider-Man is at all, and it's just setting them apart without necessarily making Norman an antagonist, which I think is a really great decision, so that way the show can have like longevity, and we don't have to see Norman become Green Goblin next season. Also in episode 4, we get introduced to Dr. Octopus, a character who I was really nervous how they were going to adapt, and he ends up being one of my favorite characters in the show. He's a self-absorbed genius, he's condescending, he's a jerk, he's a know-it-all, and yet, consistently throughout all of this, he rises above it to show off his intelligence. You can see the seeds being planted for a great Dr. Octopus here, and I'm so excited to see where he goes by the end of the show. I have to admit though, I was really hoping for actual Doc Ock, not just Otto Octavius. They have the arms in one scene, and I think that scene is really cool, but he never actually wears them, and at the end of the show, he just like draws them in his prison wall, and you're like, whoa! Except that scene doesn't really seem that like surprising because we've already seen him use the arms, they just weren't attached to him. Doc Ock is also cool in the show because he gets like a sidekick character named Vincent. Vincent is fun, their banter is cute. I like Vincent. I like everything to do with Doc Ock in this show. We mentioned it earlier, but Harry finds out who Peter is after loosely knowing him. They talk maybe like 2 or 3 times in the show before this. And then he finds out, he joins Team Spider-Man, and that's kind of it. It's not that interesting. And it sucks because their conversations are fun, and I like the chemistry that they have, and I like this Harry's voice actor. I like how he looks, I like the presence he brings, but the relationship just feels kind of boring and stale because there's no tension there. Continuing on with this show, kind of amending the MCU's mistakes, we get Mac Gargan in the show, who is definitely based on the Homecoming version. It's like, it's not even funny. Like, it's just the Homecoming version, but in this show, and I love it. He's not going to become Scorpion until I think like 2 episodes later, but it's still really cool. One cameo that I'm not unhappy to see is Daredevil. The Man Without Fear pulls up in this show. He tries to tell Peter that Norman is hiding something. Peter doesn't believe him, and Norman actually uses this as like an excuse to be like, wait, but I figured out who's been creating all these supervillains. Otto Octavius. It's him. It's always been him. And he really takes Peter's attention away from what Daredevil was trying to communicate to him. That's kind of a problem I have with this show, by the way. For the first 5 episodes, the villains are not Spider-Man villains. They're just like, hey, what if we gave this guy cool boots? What if this lady was a unicorn? And it's just a boring premise that I don't like. I get that it's to set up Otto Octavius, but I think there were like so many low-level Spider-Man villains that you could have adapted here in the meantime, before we got to these big characters, and you chose not to, which sucks. Also in this episode, we get Nico finding out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, a reveal that happens way too soon in the show. I don't like this decision. It's arguably the worst decision that they could have gone with, and I'm just not a fan of it. However, the end of this episode does have something promising, which is Mac Gargan the Scorpion. He gets his little vest, and we're going to see him next episode. Lonnie and Pearl continue to be the best part of the show for me. Lonnie is just such an interesting character. I didn't really contextualize it earlier, I don't think, so really quick in case you forgot or haven't seen the show. First of all, go watch it, but if you forgot, Lonnie's brother tries to join a gang, and then to get him out of the gang, Lonnie joins it in place of him and is kind of stuck in this, and it causes him to lose his relationship. It causes him to start failing classes and skipping school. So Pearl and Lonnie like talking about it in this great scene is just so well done in my opinion. And Scorpion pulling up is just one of the most awesome scenes ever. I mean, he has like this gruesome kill, which I was not expecting going into this show, but I'm really glad that it seems like they're able to get away with some stuff, you know? They don't overdo it on like gore, but they're going to be honest and show you the stakes of these characters. As I mentioned, Nico in the last episode found out that Peter Parker was Spider-Man, and I mean, it's dealt with pretty much immediately here. Harry and Nico figure it out. They have like a fun little driving scene, which is cute, but I mean, I don't think I was ready for Nico to know. I wasn't even really ready for Harry to know, and so this whole thing just feels kind of lame, and I was just waiting to get to the next thing. And boy, was I correct to wait for the next big thing, because the next big thing is Peter taking a beating from Scorpion. This is like the best action scene in the whole show. Even the last 2 episodes don't live up to this. This is such a great fight scene. Peter really gets his world rocked, and I think it's just so cool. We also get a Green Goblin tease with the glider coming in to save Peter. And I think everything here is just done really well. Like, you really feel the consequences and the weight of this choice, which is something that I think that the show has been missing up until this point. Everything has felt kind of weightless. You know, Harry finds out he's part of Team Spider-Man. Nico finds out she's part of Team Spider-Man. Norman finds out he's part of Team Spider-Man. And so I'm really glad that they went with this decision that really is going to push Peter to his lowest. Because I think that the only way for this version of Peter to be interesting, unfortunately, is to have him at his complete lowest. Because when he's not, he's just like a boring nice guy. Because why would he have an actual personality when you can make him so generic so that way every teenage boy and every teenage girl and everyone can put themselves into that character and see themselves represented? He has become like such a self-insert character. It's my biggest problem with the MCU Peter Parker. He just feels too much like every teenager in America. Do you know what I mean? The next episode is pretty small, but it has something that the MCU Spider-Man really lacks. And that's an actual relationship with May. She's in about every episode. Every time she's on screen, she's stealing the spotlight from Peter. They have these wholesome, fun exchanges, and I like it a lot. And in this episode, the pep talk that she gives him feels like what I wish we got from the MCU. It's very like similar to the 2012 and 2014 Aunt May that I love so much from the TASM movies. Just good old Aunt May letting Peter know that he's loved and that he's a good enough person. I like this more than just her knowing he's Spider-Man, because he feels seen in a way that's more meaningful than just, hey, you're Spider-Man and you're trying your best. You know what I mean? Which is kind of what Far From Home and No Way Home turned into. Dr. Octopus gets arrested because of Norman, and this is where we really see Norman start to double down on some not cool territory. He gets very manipulative from this point on. This is also the episode where we get this line.
With great power comes great respect.
And although I love the No Way Home scene where Aunt May says it, this is just so cool. Peter kind of learning through reverse psychology is like, it's such an interesting way to create such like friction between him and Norman. But again, they're really trying to make sure that you don't believe Norman is going to be a full villain yet. You don't know what to expect from his character, and I like that a lot. Chameleon's here. He's there for like a minute or two. He's one of the Russians from a different episode. That episode also set up Rhino. Yeah. I guess we'll see next season where this all goes. There's so much being set up in this season that I almost feel like season 2 has to be the best thing I've ever seen in order for this season to really be considered a great piece of television. We get the classic suit though. Unfortunately, Peter doesn't make it himself, but it is his own design, which is better than nothing. Norman's scene where he talks to Otto in jail is like so masterfully done, and I think that it's a great way of showing who Norman really is. This is arguably where Norman reveals the most about himself, and I like it a lot. I'm really, really excited to see where this character goes, and I'm excited to see where Doc Ock goes too. This episode gives us closure for now on like Lonnie's story though. So up until this point, you know, he's joined the gang in place of his brother. He started to like it. He pushed away Pearl willingly when he had every chance to leave. And this episode, it has like this final confrontation between the Scorpions and the 110th Street gang, I think is what they are. And it's boring. In this final confrontation between the two gangs, we get Big Donovan, who's like the leader of the 1/10 gang, and he just like ups and leaves, which is out of character for him up until this point, and it feels really random. I'm not a fan of the decision at all. It just feels very like shoved in to get Tombstone to be the leader of the gang. And not just that, but it's like not addressed at all pretty much after this. Like nobody even mentions it. Tombstone also gets superpowers from gas, I guess. Sure, we'll see where this plotline goes. I think that this ending is like the lamest choice they could have gone with for Lonnie, which is unfortunate because I really did like him. And I still like him, and I'm just a little nervous about where his story's going. Also, if you hear some background noise, it's because my neighbors are cutting their grass. It's very annoying, but I'm just gonna try to move on past it, you know? Spider-Man also has another confrontation with Scorpion, and the action here is really great once again. It's really fun. I like Scorpion a lot. I like his relationship with Spider-Man. I like him calling him Araña. I think it's all really cool. However, Peter's gonna kill Scorpion, and it's a very like No Way Home-esque scene, and Lonnie is the one that stops him. Lonnie tells Peter that people look up to him, and that if Spider-Man becomes a killer, he'll become just like the bad guys. Which makes no sense because earlier, Lonnie actually told Pearl that he doesn't care about what people think about him because he's doing the right thing. I guess in my mind, he would see killing Scorpion as the right thing to do. I don't know, this show just seems, again, inoffensive. Seems like they don't want to make any of these characters too unlikable, and I think Lonnie should not have been the one to stop Peter, especially when Nico was there for the whole fight. Nico could have been the one to do that, and that would have been more in line with her character. At the end of episode 9, right before the finale, we are introduced to the concept that Oscorp is trying to recreate Spider-Man using Peter Parker's DNA. This is going to be weirdly important, so get ready. Norman doesn't necessarily out himself as a villain, but he does out himself as a liar. He's been manipulating all his interns to make like this portal to space. And Doctor Strange comes and he's like, hey, you need to stop doing this. Norman's like, no, okay, this is groundbreaking science. Let's do it anyway. Boop. And it goes all wrong. We get that Venom thing again, and it's revealed that Peter's origin is a weird paradox. So Norman tries to open up a wormhole to space, and the symbiote monster thing comes through. So Peter needs to fix the machine to send the symbiote monster back, and Doctor Strange, in order to distract it and get away from the situation so Peter can work, takes it back in time. Back in time when? To the first episode. That's the monster we see in episode 1. That's why Doctor Strange is there. What? And the spider that bites Peter is actually a spider that was made using his own blood. That spider couldn't have existed without Peter's blood, but how could Peter have had spider powers before he got bit? Where are these spider powers coming from? Where's that spider from? It's a paradox, and I don't really get why they did it. I don't know if this is supposed to be kind of like what JMS was trying to do in his Spider-Man run, but it's not nearly as well done here. They don't really explain it too much. I don't know. All I know is that the spider is left alive, and we're getting Spider-Gwen in the next season. We're going to see how that turns out. I'm not going to judge a decision before I see it play out. However, I will say that this interpretation right here is my favorite, and I hope that this is what happens. After all is said and done, Scorpion's gone, the symbiote monster's gone. Harry starts an organization called Web, which is an organization for geniuses that geniuses can actually trust, since the last organization, Oscorp, was clearly lying and manipulative. This is really random. I don't care for this decision, and I think it's way too early. It seems like they're already setting up more superpowered people who are going to be joining Web. I don't know where this plotline is going, but pretty much everyone who is an intern is invited. Nico and Peter are invited, and characters like Max Dillon, who is Electro, and Ned Leeds, not that one, probably this one, they're also invited. Really no idea where this is going, but I'm not a fan of Peter being super intertwined with organizations that are bigger than him anyway. I kind of like him to be a little bit more solo, which does not mean that I don't want a supporting cast. It means that I don't want Peter to be part of a company while he's Spider-Man. It's just very lame. Also, Lonnie is invited to join Web. He hasn't been to high school. He hasn't even graduated. He talks about getting his GED, and yet he's invited to Web. What is he going to do at Web? And how? I don't even understand. Why would he have time for Web and not time for school? The whole reason he wasn't going to school is because he was preoccupied with, like, gang stuff, right? And now he has time for Web? What is Web? What are they doing with this? The last few minutes of the last episode is just kind of a montage of wrapping up plot lines and setting up new ones. and it feels very forced. It left me just kind of feeling like the show was incomplete. I'm not saying that the next season is going to be bad and that all these plot lines suck. It's just to say that I don't think that this felt like a very good way to end this season. But yeah, that's my thoughts on the show. I'm excited to see where it goes. And I hope you're excited to see where this channel goes. That's right, I'm going to hopefully be uploading more consistently. So hit the like button if you liked this video. Hit the subscribe button if you liked me. And I'll see you on the next one. Stay safe, stay cool, and I'll see you later. Peace.